Folks, thank you for being here for our next Community Lightning Talk. Today I'm joined by Gianluca Mardente, who is a principal engineer at Cisco, and more importantly for today's talk, the founder and creator of Project Sveltos, an open source Kubernetes cluster management tool that simplifies cluster management. Gianluca, thanks for being here. Could you start by telling us briefly about Sveltos, why you started it, and what problems it solves?
Hey, thanks for having me here. I started Veltos a few years back. It's almost 3 years now, because I was working on a project where we had to create multiple clusters on demand, on-prem, and I felt there was a need to be able to consistently distribute advanced and application on all those clusters. When you're managing a fleet of clusters, you want to have like a simple tool where you can say, this is the configuration that has to go to all production cluster. This is the configuration that has to style staging cluster and have a single place where you go and change this configuration and it applies to the matching clusters. That's where I start with Veltos.
Okay. And before you incorporated NATS into Sveltos, what did the tool look like? Were you using an alternate solution? And what made NATS a valuable add?
So I'll take a step back before I go to NATS, because essentially Veltos has an event-driven framework. You can essentially instruct Veltos to watch for certain Kubernetes resources, and you can tell Veltos what to do when certain events happen. For instance, a Kubernetes service is created. I want to create a network policy that exposes this Kubernetes service, and you do with an event framework. So before NATS, Veltos was limited to only watching Kubernetes resources and events related to Kubernetes resources. But many Veltos users asked whether it was possible to watch for events which were happening outside the Kubernetes clusters. For instance, you may have a user logging in or logging out. You might have a new user added onboarded. And so I needed something to be able to watch for those events happening outside of the cluster. And then I read a post by Justina Beck on LinkedIn. I think it was called the Nomadic Apps Manifesto. And I
Hmm.
started looking into, and it sounded like really, really interesting. And so I started looking into NATS. And I decided to use it. The main reason at that point before NATS I did not have like any integration to watch for events outside of the cluster, it was because any other solution is too heavy. You know, I could have used Kafka, but it's very heavy. It consumes a lot of resources. It's not really that straightforward to set it up like on a Kubernetes cluster. Now think if you have to set it up like in 100 clusters. And instead, like when I started playing with NATS, it was super easy. Like I took the NATS and charts. Veltos has the ability to say, okay, this is an chart to deploy in all the clusters which are matching this set of labels. And so this is essentially what I did. Like in 5 minutes, I had Veltos deploying NATS in all my staging clusters, and NATS was up and running. And so that was the first part. And so it was like super easy to bring it up. It was not consuming a lot of resource. For instance, project that is important because you have to pay for those resources, so it's important that doesn't consume much. And then also integrating was super straightforward. So the way Sveltos works is that Sveltos deploys an agent in every managed cluster, and this is the agent that watches for events. And so what I did, I simply integrated this agent to connect to the NATS and listen for events which were being published on certain topics. And that's what I did. And I think it took me less than half a day to have a prototype which was working. And from there, pretty much like it was super exciting. So like I kept announcing. But honestly, the main reason was it's very easy to start and it is very light. It doesn't consume much. And for me, those were main keys. Like, okay, this is what I need. And this is what like Sveltos user need.
Very nice. Yeah, it sounds like with NATS you were able to add functionality to Sveltos that otherwise wouldn't have made sense, right? Kafka wasn't a fit for enabling this capability because it was too heavyweight for for Sveltos?
Yeah, I mean it's because at the end I'm deploying like NATS on not just on one cluster. Sveltos is to manage like a fleet of Kubernetes clusters, and so I need to deploy NATS in every cluster where I want to watch for events which are happening outside of the cluster. It's not a requirement. User can have like NATS deployed in a single cluster, and all the events are pushed to the NATS server and from there distributed everywhere by Sveltos. But ideally, if you want to if your clusters, if you have a fleet of clusters and you have different tenants managing different clusters, maybe, every tenant want to have like his own NATS server. And so then I needed something which I was able to deploy in more than one cluster. And of course, when you scale the number of clusters where you have to deploy, the less resource you consume, the more important it becomes because, if it consumes a lot in one cluster and then you have to deploy in 10 clusters, now your costs are going up by 10, right? So instead with NATS, it was very, very easy. And it's also very easy to explain. It's also very easy for Sveltos user to create their own client that publishes events. And so, every user creates his own client and publishes events to the NATS server, and then from there, Sveltos takes it over and does the rest of the work. So it's not just deploying, but it's also the ability for users to create their own NATS server or publish events to the NATS server. That was like one of the key, because if it's too complex, nobody's going to use it. But if
Right.
it's very easy, then everybody's going to use it.
Nice. Yeah, I think that tracks with things that we've seen with other users and customers, both a smooth or easy operator experience, but also the developer experience being relatively straightforward. Um, that leads me to my next
And
question.
also, sorry to interrupt, but also like the documentation, honestly, it's wonderful. You just go there, you read it. I use like Sveltos written in Go. So, I just pick like the Go section of the documentation. But it's very easy. Just import this to this to this, and it's up and running. It's like few lines of code and it works.
Fantastic. Um, yeah, and it's great to hear that you're also a Go fan because, of course, that is the language of NAT servers. So always a good fit when someone's using Go. Um, we sort of touched on this, but what as someone who's relatively new to NATS and onboarded quickly and ramped up quickly and found success quickly, what advice would you give to attendees who are considering building with NATS or just getting started building with NATS? What things did you do, or what things did you find were useful in getting started quickly?
Um, I would just say, I just go into documentation and build a prototype. Do not spend too much time like trying like to have the perfect solution. Just go with the prototype, see that it works, and then pretty much from there, pretty much you can build whatever you need. At least that was my experience. Usually you go and spend much time reading because things are not clear, but it was super easy to create a client, to create a server, because for my testing I also had to create a client. So for me, having the writing, developing the client and the server, that publishing events and listening to events and putting that server in the middle, it was very easy. And half a day of work, and I had a prototype working. And then of course from there, then I had to build like other things that were needed for Sveltos. But um, at least I knew that I had something working in half a day, and and then after that I could have improved like whatever else I needed.
Very
So
nice.
just read the documentation because it goes to the point, straight to the point, and it's actually what you need.
Cool. How about any future plans for um, expanding or growing the scope of how NATS is used within Sveltos? I guess I didn't ask yet. Are you using just core NATS, or are you using Jetstream? What specific capabilities are most important to Sveltos, and any you're looking to add in the future?
So this is actually up to the users, because Sveltos is integrated to be able to receive events from both like NATS or Jetstream, whether the user wants to use NATS or Jetstream. It depends on the type of events that they want like Sveltos to be notified of. If they don't want to lose an event, they want to make sure that the event is delivered, then they have to go with Jetstream. But that is up to the user. I will say that luckily, Sveltos user is going to use like NATS for prototyping their own client and seeing that the end-to-end works. And then when they go in production, very likely they're going to switch to Jetstream because you have reliability, which is fundamental when you go like to production. But Sveltos is integrated like to work with bot.
Very
And
cool.
as part of as future plans, like actually there was a nice request which already got. Essentially, as I was mentioning, Sveltos resides in a management cluster, and from this management cluster, manage advanced application in a fleet of clusters. And one request was, okay, so now Sveltos, I can have NATS deployed in all those clusters, and Sveltos is receiving like those events. One request was, can you integrate also, can you have NATS also in the management cluster so we can watch for events in all the managed clusters? Which Sveltos sends those events to the management cluster, and from the management cluster have send it to the NATS. And so at this point, they can build their own client on the other side, which is receiving those events. And so at this point now you have like events which can be published like through NATS in any cluster which is managed. They're all forwarded to the management cluster. And from the management cluster, there is another NATS server which forwards to where the client wants those events to be sent. So it's actually an interesting use case. It's actually a pretty cool one.
Very nice.
And
That also,
beauty of NATS, it makes it very easy to build this entire flow. So
yeah, I've heard similar stories of um, when end users of NATS applications or tooling kind of realize what NATS is under the covers, they want more access, they want more data, more events, and because they realize how easy it is, and so uh, yeah, it seems to spread once it gets inside a tool or
yes,
inside an application. Well, Gianluca,
absolutely.
anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I want to again congratulate again with because my experience was great, and as a developer, it was a great experience, and it's not so common to be like that great. So kudos to the team.
Well, Gianluca, thank you for being a part of the NATS community, and thank you for making time to chat today. We appreciate it.
All right, and we have Gianluca joining us live for a quick Q&A. Thank you so much for being here. We had two questions that came through that I think were particularly interesting. So first off, what is your strategy on schemas and breaking changes when dealing with multiple customer managed clusters?
That it's actually on the user side, because what the integration that I did with Sveltos and NATS is that Sveltos expects to receive cloud events from the from NATS, and then he processes those events to create to deploy other stuff. So usually the event might be a user logged in, and I want to create a Postgres database in response, or I want to create an entry in a Postgres database in response. So pretty much like Sveltos used that way. So I'm not much concerned about schema, because the content for Sveltos is a cloud event, and it's up to the user what they want to put in the cloud event, and how to consume it essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tell us how quickly you integrated NATS. So Sveltos was a pretty feature complete platform that you went to then integrating NATS for the capabilities. So what was that journey like, and how hard was it to get that kind of initial integration in?
It was honestly super easy. I in the past I had to use Kafka as a messaging system, and my experience with Kafka was what stopping me from adding Sveltos, supporting Sveltos to watch for events happening outside the cluster, because I was too heavy, and every day you have to deal with something, and this is not coming up, and that is not coming up, and you have to restart this, and you have to reset this. So when I started reading the documentation, it's like, okay, this looks super easy. I just have to import this one, and this is how I connect, and this you just need to find a way to pass the credentials so I can connect, and that's it. So it was honestly like amazing. And that's what kept me going, because the first step was like, let me see if I can actually integrate quickly. And I was able to bring it up, integrate quickly. And then I said, okay, now it makes sense. This works, because I tried like multiple times. So let me build like the entire flow end to end. But yeah, it was one of the rare experience where you just go to the documentation and you don't have to read 10 pages to get to the point of, okay, this is what I need. So it was straight there. It's like, oh, you're using Go, just click the link. This is the Go documentation, import this package and use it.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's the documentation is something we are always working to upgrade and improve, and we've had some feedback that it can be more difficult to get into, especially for newer users. But I do appreciate, and there's so much good stuff in there too that really dives into the conceptual background. So I appreciate that positive feedback. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
And there is a bunch of examples as well. Like I found like just amazing. Like it's, you want to do this is an example. You want to do this is an example. So it's amazing.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get moving right along with our schedule here, but thank you again for your time.